This Week with Bob Mueller on News 2.
This week,
freedom is priceless.
President Biden surprised the world with an unannounced visit to war-torn Ukraine.
Passenger rail service is a part of my family's history.
It's been 44 years since passenger rail service was available in Nashville. That could be changing.
What is the problem that we're trying to fix?
A push by Republicans to stop TennCare from reimbursing transgender health care costs. More in our This Week cover story.
So we're very thankful for Habitat and what it's meant to us.
Former President Jimmy Carter has entered hospice care. I sat down with him in 2019. Tonight, a look back at our conversation. Hello and welcome to another edition of This Week. Former President Jimmy Carter, as you heard, has entered home hospice care. Tonight, a look back at my 2019 interview with the former president. Also, a renewed push for passenger rail service to Tennessee, and President Biden with an unannounced visit to war-torn Ukraine.
An historic day in Kyiv. President Biden making a previously unannounced stop in Ukraine's capital city with heavily armed police and army officers standing guard.
You see Joe Biden.
Ukraine's President Zelensky showing Biden his plaque, among others, honoring world leaders who stood with Ukraine in dark times. The two presidents also discussing that nation's path forward in its nearly year-old war with Russia.
Freedom is priceless. It's worth fighting for as long as it takes, and that's how long we're going to be with you, Mr. President, for as long as it takes.
The White House says the U.S. alerted Russian officials about Biden's travel to prevent potential conflicts. The surprise stop coming one day before Biden's Poland visit, where he's expected to give a speech to rally worldwide support for Ukraine.
The Ukrainians are now pushing back and taking back up to 50% of what the Russians took in the initial push. It is working.
But polling this month from ABC News and the Washington Post finds 33% of Americans saying the U.S. is doing too much for Ukraine. That's up from 14% last spring, and after many Republicans have insisted the U.S. won't give Ukraine a blank check.
That is an argument that this White House strongly rejects. They note that Ukraine isn't getting everything they have asked for.
Biden saying today there's now significant support in Congress for Ukraine. And the president spent more than 5 hours today in Ukraine with U.S. air surveillance planes keeping watch over Biden from Polish airspace. Justin Finch, ABC News, Washington.
Passenger rail service connecting cities in Tennessee hasn't existed for decades, but that could be changing. State Capitol newsroom reporter Chris O'Brien tells us the state sent a letter to the federal government expressing interest in the idea.
Tom Nickel doesn't have a car. He pretty much walks everywhere unless it's a really long distance.
I've always had to go either primarily by bus. They did have passenger air service to Chattanooga some years ago, but that's been discontinued.
And his family has a past in the railroad industry. His grandfather, William L. Nickel Jr., was the general freight agent for the Nashville-Chattanooga-St. Louis Railroad.
Passenger rail service is a part of my family's history.
Tom still remembers the first and only time he stepped into Nashville's Union Station when it was still servicing passenger rail. That was in the 1960s.
The sheer scale and scope and architecture of the station has always stuck with me.
Though it might not be at Union Station, he might step into another passenger rail station in Tennessee. Earlier this year, the state sent a letter to the Federal Rail Administration saying there is great interest in Tennessee when it comes to passenger rail.
We certainly are looking at that. It needs to be multimodal, whatever we do. Roads are not the only answer.
It's no secret in Tennessee that traffic is a problem. This rail proposal could help somewhat alleviate that.
It's time to look elsewhere and maybe look to the past a little bit and revisit rail.
State leaders have discussed rail lines from Nashville to Memphis and Chattanooga, and eventually Knoxville and Johnson City. The idea itself is bipartisan.
Biggest mistakes that a lot of states made decades ago was removing all the rail access that ran across their state.
To this day, Tom has never been on a train, but he hopes that experience comes soon.
I would be thrilled if that happened. I have been told by friends in my church that there is nothing as relaxing as a long-distance train ride.
A bronze statue that shows an unknown Confederate soldier is bucking recent trends. According to the Metro Arts Commission, it was put up in 1909 to help, quote, bereaved Southerners interpret the meaning and implications of defeat. Metro's Park Board voted to take it down, but it needs state permission first, and Tennessee's Historical Commission rejected the request.
Confederate monuments and memorials have been low-hanging fruit because they're the easiest to demonize in the view of many.
Take them down, and then we can have a serious conversation about how we want to actually memorialize this moment and make sure that we include a lot of the African Americans who died and fought in the Civil War, that we include a much more complex history.
Metro's Park Board will discuss the next step once it receives the state's decision in writing. Now to our This Week cover story. Legislation to ban TennCare from reimbursing transgender care is gaining momentum. News 2's Chris O'Brien has more with lawmakers and a very angry mother.
The issue of transgender care continues to be a divisive topic.
Tell me what we're solving for with this. What is the problem that we're trying to fix?
Chairman Wright.
We're not particularly trying to fix a problem. This is just a service that is currently available to TennCare that will no longer be available as other services under TennCare are not provided.
A new bill makes it so TennCare shall not provide reimbursement or coverage to managed care organizations if they offer transgender care outside of counseling. That includes organizations out of state. Today in the House Insurance Committee, that bill passed along party lines.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The ayes have it. The bill moves on to Finance Committee.
Dozens of people from several equality groups joined the meeting. They say this bill is just the latest example of pushing their community away.
It's not okay to continue to be beat down and punished in the name of religion, in the name of God, and usually that's where they're coming from, whether they say it or not, because we live in the Bible Belt. We live in the buckle of the Bible Belt.
Candace Winters Johnson has a transgender son. I asked her if she had any sort of message for lawmakers prior to today's hearing.
I don't think I can say it on TV.
Republicans argue this bill isn't meant to harm anyone. It's just lining up with the values of the constituency.
This type of service and the way it is being starting to be implemented is not within the values of most Tennesseans.
The bill now heads to the House Finance Committee, which is generally the last step before it hits the House floor. In Nashville, Chris O'Brien.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. Former President Jimmy Carter stopped further medical intervention this week and entered home hospice care. The 98-year-old is the oldest living former president in history. He was last in Nashville in 2019. Tonight, a look back at my interview with him that day, starting with his reason for being in Nashville. The former president and former First Lady Rosalynn have been involved with Habitat for Humanity, building homes for low-income families for 40 years. In 2019, the former first couple came to Nashville to help with construction of 21 Habitat homes.
Well, we've tried it for 36 years, as a matter of fact. This is the 36th year, and we've enjoyed all of them, but I never have seen a week end when I wasn't glad to see, the thing completed. So we're very thankful for Habitat and what it's meant to us, and the opportunity it's given us to get to know people that we would not otherwise have known.
Habitat for Humanity, obviously a wonderful charity. There's so many other charities out there. What is it about Habitat that drew you and Rosalynn to this charity, to this event?
I think one thing is it lets us put our faith into action. And it's an easy transfer from being wealthy with a lot of advantages and meeting and getting to know on an equal basis the people that never have had a decent home before. So that transition is not easy to make, but Habitat makes it very easy.
21 homes here, 21 families going to have new homes. And the aspect to me that's interesting is it's not free. The volunteers that are here and the donations that are here.
Pay full price for the house.
And the people that are going to be moving in, they do sweat equity. Does that give them that home ownership, that feeling of accomplishment?
I think it really does. And it forms a partnership, too, between people that never have had a decent home and one that are getting for the first time, and the ones who, like me, I grew up in a house without water, and running water or electricity, and I was a teenager before I got electricity in my house. So I know what it means to live in a house, this below standard.
I know you know about hard work being a peanut farmer from Georgia. I was a farm kid in the Midwest
where
people help their neighbors. When you see this kind of activity, this is what the world is about. This is how America gets better.
And Nashville's been a good host city because we not only have finished 21 houses, but we've raised enough money to build 59 in all. So we're at the end of this next year, we'll have 59 houses here on this site instead of 21.
Again, a great effort, but the homelessness problem, the affordable housing issue, is Habitat for Humanity the answer? Does the federal government need to do more? Do local governments need to do more?
Habitat offers the answer, but a lot of people don't listen. And I think the local people quite often do, because you can't have a fast-growing city like Nashville continue to grow if the school teachers and the firemen and the policemen can't buy a house, with the salaries they make. They have to have 2 or 3 people working in a family to afford a down payment on a new house or rental in the community. So I think everybody ought to remember that affordable housing is a very important aspect of any city that hopes to grow in the future.
Today is the 17th anniversary of you receiving your Nobel Peace Prize. What did that mean for you?
Well, that was a very gratifying thing, but I've gotten 3 Emmys, and my grandchildren think the Emmys are much more important than the Nobel Peace Prize.
That's impressive. President Carter was elected in 1976, the bicentennial of the country. It was a different time, but some things remain the same: a partisan divide, costly elections, and presidential debates. In 2019, Belmont University was chosen to host its 2nd presidential debate. I just found out, just confirmed, that Belmont University is going to host one of the presidential debates here in Nashville next year. They hosted one in 2008. What does that mean for the city? What does that mean for a presidential candidate?
Well, for the candidate, it's a very fearsome thing to have to undertake to get up on the stage. The first time that I did it was against Gerald Ford, the incumbent president. And for a peanut farmer from Georgia to get up on an equal basis on a stage with an incumbent, president who's been in the Congress for many years was a wonderful thing. And then later on, I'm sure Ronald Reagan felt the same way, having been a governor run against me and debating against me. So the debate site is a very important aspect of politics in America. And I think that brings out a lot of harmony, even when there's a very sharp divide during the debate itself. I think people begin to see that both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have an important role to play in the political process.
You're an optimist. We're in tribal politics. Is that ever going to end? Is it always going to be you're wrong and I'm right?
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid it's going to be that way for a long time, because I don't see the Supreme Court, reversing some of the problems with our political system. The Citizens United that opened up an unlimited amount of wealth to go into the campaign is a very disastrous thing for politics. When I ran against Gerald Ford for the first time, you know how much money he and I raised for the general election? 0. We didn't raise a single penny. We just spent the $1 per person checkoff, and we ought to someday come back to that and have public financing, I think, of a general election. At least that would prevent some of the divisions that take place within the parties.
President Trump, right.
And then gerrymandering, modifying districts, in a very compromising and I think almost sometimes a ludicrous way is an embarrassment to our political system as well. We have a lot of changes to make it up.
Gerrymandering is being looked at in the court. Is there hope that gets resolved?
With the current Supreme Court, I don't think so. With a future Supreme Court, maybe.
President Trump, as you know, fighting for his survival. What's going on up there? His supporters claim that he's a victim of being persecuted because he kicks down walls, breaks norms, and governs as an outsider with impulse, while detractors say he's an out-of-control, lawless, national security endangering leader. Who's right?
I tend to agree with the detractors. And I think that President Trump has violated one of the basic principles on which I base my life. That is to at least tell the truth. But I don't think anybody would accuse President Trump of telling the truth when it's uncomfortable for him. And that's a keystone. You know, my school superintendent used to tell us when we were little children in school, we must accommodate changing times, but cling to principles that never change. And I think one of the principles that never change is at least tell the truth. Because you can't be a respected leader by all people under your leadership if they don't have confidence that what you say is truthful.
Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Welcome back to This Week. I met Jimmy Carter as a young reporter working in Peoria in 1976 when he ran for the presidency. I met him again in 1981 working here in Nashville, in Plains, Georgia, the day he left office and the 52 American hostages held in Iran were released. I told him these stories during our 2019 interview, and he said to me, "Glad to see you again." Here now more with the former president and the Iran hostage crisis. In 1979, 52 Americans were taken hostage when militarized Iranian college students supporting the Iranian Revolution took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. In April of 1980, President Carter sent a rescue team to free the hostages. Operation Eagle Claw ended with the death of 8 U.S. service members when a helicopter collided with a transport plane in the desert. Political analysts point to the hostage crisis as a major reason Carter lost to Ronald Reagan in 1980. Iran finally released the hostages minutes after Carter left office and Reagan was sworn in. 40 years ago this year, as you were president, 52 American hostages were taken hostage in Iran. During your presidency, you tried to get them back. There was the failed mission in April. Some point to that as the reason you lost. And then the ultimate insult, they wouldn't let the hostages go until you were out of office. And I was in Plains that day when you smiled, just like you're smiling now. You were out of office, but those Americans were free. What was that day like for you?
That was a very triumphant day for me because I promised the people of America that I would try to keep a country at peace and honor human rights. And keeping the peace with Iran when they were holding the hostages was a very difficult challenge for me because a lot of people advised me, even my closest friends, you know, we need to bomb Tehran. But we wound up finally with peace, and all the hostages were free. So I was very, very successful eventually. You know, our country has been a nation for 243 years, since 1776. We've only been at peace 16 years. We've been at war 227 years. And that's a harsh thing to remember. But I'm glad that a number of those peaceful years were when I was in the White House.
The then 94-year-old former president was positive about the future of America and American politics. What do you see down the road for the future of this great country? Is the turmoil of the Trump administration a blip, or is this a defining moment that may change the way the country goes?
No, I think it's a blip because down through history, our country has always been able to overcome basic problems like slavery and segregation and depriving women of a right to vote and things like that. It's taken us a long time, but eventually I think the heterogeneous nature of a makeup of America now, with everybody being an immigrant, kind of makes it possible for us to be innovative and find a way to success even when we have been under difficulty for a while. So I think that the downside that we were discussing to our political system now will be changed in the future for the better.
As we head into next year's presidential election, a lot of issues standing out there. What's the biggest issue facing this country that needs to be resolved?
I think the environmental issue is probably the worst. I would like to see our country be a champion of peace and human rights and environmental equality, and maybe the shaping of equality among American citizens. Those things ought to be the definition of a superpower, and I think our country is able to reach those pinnacles of success in politics as well as in life.
As you look around here and see this optimism, is this what the country is about? Is the country optimistic? You see so much negativity on social media and such infighting, but is this the real world? Is this what America is like?
Well, when we come from watching television in a hotel room out to the site, and everybody is being treated equally, and we're proud of what we're doing for one another. There's an element of unselfishness and friendship, and even love sometimes, that kind of permeates a habitat site.
What does it mean for you and your wife to be able to give this great gift to these wonderful families who they start their lives in one of these houses?
Well, you know, we are not able to work as hard as we used to earlier.
You work pretty hard. I saw you with the nail gun. You're
well,
doing all right.
we stick with the nail gun, but we've tried to make something, the post and other things that go on every house. So everybody that lives in a house will know that at least the Carters made some of this with their own hands.
Mr. President, appreciate your time very much. And your black eye's healing up very nicely.
It is, yeah. Well, that's what habitat site does for you. It even made my eye feel well.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure
It's been a very pleasure to see you again. It's been 44 years. Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. We hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week, and you have a great week.